everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, and whatever other festivals and holidays are going on this time of year. We are recording in mid-December 2016. What a year it has been. And so as always, we're super grateful. We have two podcasts, the Vox Community Podcast, which is voxoc.com. That is the teaching and the stories from our little church in North Orange County, California. And we also have this podcast, the Vox Podcast, which is at voxpodcast.com. We are so grateful. We have 51 Patreon supporters, almost $1,500 a month. That blows our minds in terms of the kindness and generosity of folks. We just had somebody donate some new microphones to us, and so we're excited to break those out. But anyway, I mean, just thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for the reviews. Thank you for your participation, your questions, your criticisms, your feedback. This is just ridiculously fun. So if you want to support us on Patreon, go to patreon.com/VoxPodcast. And there for $5 you get a really ridiculous gift. For $25 you get stuff. For $50 you get more stuff. So check that out. And thank you for those of you who've already signed up.
Real fast, I'm remembering this now because it came up last night. Do we want to quickly explain like
that's
funding?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've gotten several questions from people who have asked, okay, so if I support the podcast, am I supporting the church? Or if I support the church, am I supporting the podcast? And those are great questions. So your donations to the church, for those of you that are into that kind of thing, are tax deductible because the church is a 501c3 religious nonprofit corporation in the state of California. The Vox Podcast, that's not deductible because we are a for-profit company, for-profit proprietorship, and people have been asking, okay, so why? What's the difference? And the difference is really twofold. First, we have loads of people who follow the podcast who are not Jesus people and who do not want to support a church. They're okay supporting a podcast that talks about religious, spiritual, Christian, non-Christian kinds of things, but they're not okay supporting a church, which is totally fine, and hallelujah. And then secondly, if we tie the podcast in with the church, we can't talk about all the things we would want to talk about, namely politics. So to be for profit isn't that we're trying to make a bunch of money off of this. It rather gives us the freedom to talk about anything, which is kind of our tagline, right. Talk about anything. And it allows people the opportunity to support the podcast without supporting the church, because we've had a couple of instances where people have wanted to do just that. So that's the difference. Yeah. So Patreon is not tax deductible. To Vox Community, that is tax deductible. And we're astounded by the generosity both directions.
Yep,
I mean, it is absolutely crazy. And so Andy just bought a new car with that Patreon money, so we're very grateful for that.
Oh yeah, that's a junker.
So, yeah, seriously. So just a quick story that ties into a value that ties into an email. Okay, That's what we got today.
All right.
A quick story that ties into a value that ties into an email. So, yours truly, followed by Andy, of course, and now Andy tries to usurp it, but I started it, which, shocking that Andy would jump in and try to take it over. Yours truly, Fat Boy Slim here, has decided to train for a Spartan race. And if you don't know what a Spartan race is, it's part of a large industry called obstacle course racing. You've got the mudders, and you've got the Spartan races, and there are other ones that are very well known. And we're doing a sprint at the end of January. And it's what, 3 to 5 miles, 15 to 20 obstacles. Yeah. And those obstacles are dumb. I mean, it's like, here's 100 pounds of gravel, carry it half mile up a hill.
Yeah.
Here's a rope, climb that rope. Here are monkey bars. Here are walls to climb. Here's mud to crawl through with barbed wire hanging over you. I mean, those sorts of things. So it's just, but as my mama would say, and she has said this to me many times, if you're going to be dumb, you got to be tough. So that's my motto, and so I need something to kickstart the reverse fat process that needs to happen with me.
Yeah.
So to have a deadline And literally, it's a dead line. Either I die or I cross the line. It's one of those two.
I think you're going to make it. You're looking pretty good these days.
Well, Andy was very gracious. She said, you're looking less pear-shaped and more block-shaped, which I'll take. At this point, the bar is so low, I'll take it. Now, part of this, of course, requires all sorts of new gear to lift and to grasp and to run. And so I went on Amazon and I bought some socks from they're waterproof socks because you're doing a bunch of mud. And they're from Mud Gear. And so they're through Amazon Marketplace. And so Mud Gear sent me this email. You know how you have auto kind of confirmations of your order. Mm-hmm. So this is the email I got. And usually these confirmations I just delete or I put into a separate file just to keep them in case something doesn't show up.
Right.
But this one grabbed me immediately because I thought it was so cool. So, Mike, this is Malco, owner of Mud Gear. I saw your order come in for our trail socks. Phenomenal choice. I just told my jacked up warehouse team to quit doing wall traverses on the rack shelves and to put a rush order on them. We're going to bust tail to get them on your feet ASAP so they can start propelling you to all new levels of badassery. While they're killing it in the warehouse to deliver for you, why don't you take a minute and get your head right for what's about to go down? Focus your mind, crank out 30 burpees right freaking now if you have to. I did not, by the way, when I read that. To occupy your mind while you wait for shipment, you can check out our new guide called Warrior Strong, How to Become Resilient to Injury and Obstacle Course Racing, which somehow they knew I would need that. If you need anything before or after, you can reply to this email. I love how easy that is. And we'll take care of you. You have my personal thanks for being a customer. We eat, breathe, and dream obstacle course racing, live to support athletes like you. Now, the fact that they called me an athlete was worthy enough to just keep the email. But I loved the tone and the feel, and I loved the fact that I could reply to the email. It wasn't a do not reply auto confirmation. No, right. I'm sure it's a template, of course. But there was just this, it had this kind of unique sort of vibe to it. Now, once they mailed the socks, I got this email. Mike, this is Malco, owner of Mud Gear. Thank you again for your order of our trail socks. According to our records, your box of badassery has been delivered. I hope they're exactly what you're looking for, and I'd like to know what you think. If there's any problem with your order, please reply to this email right away and give us the opportunity to correct it. So I love.
So good.
So good. So the thing that really stood out for me when we started Vox, we had wanted to do a church, and we wanted hospitality. So we called it countercultural friendship or hospitality, kind of the image of a table and a meal, sharing a meal together around a table. That was the image we wanted for our community. And so hospitality was going to be a huge deal. And we were looking at different ways that businesses do customer service. And the Malco email reminded me of a value that we stole from Apple. So Andy, speaking of badassery, Andy used to work for Apple. He was a genius. He was a creative. And Apple, I've always been really impressed with Apple stores, not just how they look and what's sold there, but I've always been impressed with their orientation towards customers. Mm-hmm. And so when we were dreaming about Vox and hospitality, I just kind of threw out this dumb statement. I was like, I'd love for Vox to feel a bit like an Apple store where you come in, it's people in the same t-shirts, and they're just there to be helpful. They're not selling anything. Because the products sell themselves. They're not, they're really into a certain kind of culture. So Andy took about half a day and just from memory, went over how Apple trains its employees and just the high level stuff. And we adapted some of that to use for how we train our folks at Vox. And one of the things that came out of that discussion, we have 3 values. For if somebody's going to be a team member at Vox, everybody gets trained the same way in hospitality, and there are 3 values: to embody hospitality, to value people, and to be a lifelong learner. And to embody hospitality and to value people, those are very specific. Like we do very specific training. But to be a lifelong learner, we do something we just ripped from Apple straight. Called feedback. Now, Apple has a template they use to give and receive feedback. The Apple, and Andy, of course, chime in, but Apple has this really interesting flat organizational structure where there is hierarchy, but feedback is encouraged every single direction.
Yep.
And it's a culture where no one's offended if they get feedback that is constructive. And we wanted to build that into a church because we're all in process. We're all falling short. We're all working on our stuff together. And so we instituted this value of feedback that we framed positively as kind of a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about quickly of feedback because we got some.
Right.
And this is actually really helpful feedback. So picture 4 quadrants, okay, that form a square. And picture on the vertical axis the word general up top and the word specific on bottom. And then picture on the horizontal axis at the top of the cube the word positive and the word negative. So feedback is positive or feedback is negative. Feedback is general or feedback is specific.
Yes.
So specific feedback. Andy, let's use because sermons are my world. Let's use sermons as an example. Give me an example. Give me an example, Andy, of general positive feedback.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Yeah, your teaching was pretty good today.
Right. So positive in the sense that it was meant to encourage, general in the sense that there was nothing exact or precise about the nature of the feedback.
Right.
It was simply a general affirmation. I liked it.
Yeah.
And then of course you have general negative feedback. Give me an example.
Oh, general negative feedback
of a sermon. Yep.
Mike, your sermon wasn't so good this week.
Yeah, hated it. Something was off. You sucked. General negative feedback. Now, people think that general positive is helpful, and it is not.
Right.
Because you've told me, all you've done is you've given me just a general, a preference statement.
Right.
Right? That you liked it.
Right. And on the inverse, it could even go as far to be hurtful if someone is hoping and put a ton of work into something, and then the person that they're hoping it impresses is just oh, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
So it could actually disempower people.
Exactly. Yeah.
If it's given without any specificity.
Right.
So when people come up and say, hey, that was a great talk, thank you.
Good.
I
My
love
24
that.
hours of sermon prep really delivered.
Well, I'm glad that it's that and not the alternative. But it's not terribly helpful.
Yeah.
So Apple places a premium on specific feedback. So specific positive feedback is, hey, when you said this sentence or this verse or that story or this line, that is super helpful. Or specific negative. When you said this, it made me think this. Or when you did that, it made me feel like this.
Sure.
That is so.
Sure. Hey, like last week, hey, what you using the traditional shorthand to refer to the conservative view of marriage.
Correct. Was hurtful for some.
Right. There you go.
Absolutely. That was very specific feedback. So we live in a world of positive, general positive and general negative. Didn't like it. Not helpful for anybody.
Right.
Even when you read movie reviews or TV review, I mean, it's just the more specific, the better the review is, right? The more general, it's anyone can do that.
Yeah.
So we have a value, just like Apple, for giving and receiving specific feedback, both positive and negative. And we want to be the kind of community where that's encouraged. So that's why we call it lifelong learning, is that I never am assuming I've arrived. I'm never claiming territory in a church, because church people are crazy. They claim territory and this is my job forever and no one can tell me what to do. And we just want to blast all of that to say, no. I mean, the least theologically trained person is welcome to give me specific feedback.
Right.
It's not just no one gets to just play I've been in seminary and you haven't, and so you've got nothing to say. Apple embodies a flat organization by inviting people to give feedback all over.
Right.
Regardless. Go ahead.
Right. And I think we've intentionally created direct avenues that make it a possibility. Because we could leave it out there and say, oh, you're allowed to do this. But even having a process in which you can be difficult to navigate. So like we made an email that's specific. That's just feedback@voxoc.com.
Yes.
And then we even have a phone number that's a Q&A question thing that we do during the sermon. So it's similar. Like people do kind of give feedback through that.
Yep.
But it's clear channels that basically run really in and out, up and down to everybody in a certain role and position. So it doesn't, it's just our commitment to making room for
feedback,
and that we're all in process.
Yes, and we're not in the business of customer service. We don't have customers in a church,
right?
But what we have instead are brothers and sisters, and there has to be a way of allowing folks to express grievances, hopes, disappointments, things that are excited about, encouragements, and create a place where that's safe. Create a place where people who've been hurt or are recovering can work out that stuff. To create a place where nobody just gets to sit in an isolated room above all criticism or feedback or whatever. So that mechanism, that feedback, has been it's been helpful in marriage because the line the Apple employees use, and it's a beautiful line. Hey, I have some negative specific feedback for you right now. Is now a good time to talk about it?
Yeah.
And think about how many relationships would be improved, if people just use that line, right? Is now a good time to talk about this? I have some negative specific feedback. It lets people know it's coming.
Right.
It's specific, so it's not attacking the person. And there's a kindness to the timing of when because sometimes I can receive feedback and I'm in a great place to receive it.
Right.
And other times I'm not.
Right. And it's permission. And this is, it's not like the way we look at permission for like signing a field trip, like, oh, I need your permission to go do something. Rather, it's knowing at least when you open your mouth and say something, it's going to be received.
It's an
Why waste your time?
It's an expression of hospitality,
Yeah.
of care for the other. To say, I've got something to say. I want you to know it's negative, but I also want to respect that you may not every time to hear negative feedback is equal. Right. There are times I'm coming out of fullness and I feel secure. Other times I'm coming out of insecurity or fear, and I'm going to hear feedback and receive it entirely differently depending on where I am.
Right.
So, a story leading to a value, leading to an email.
Yeah, by the way, none of this was an ad or endorsement, just to be clear.
We don't know Mudgear.
We don't.
Although I'm going to email him back and say, hey, we mentioned you on our big podcast, how about some free socks? I'm just complimenting them on their customer service. I just absolutely thought it was phenomenal. All right, so we got an email last night, as a matter of fact, from a gentleman who was excellent at giving feedback. And he gave some positive feedback and gave some negative specific feedback. And I asked him permission to share this. He said yes, as long as we don't use it for podcast fodder. And I didn't know what that meant, because to me this stimulates great questions and conversation. So I'm going to read and kind of react a bit to the email as we go, just because it critiques some of the space we're occupying in the podcast world, and so I think it's worthy of thinking about. So he gives some specific positive feedback. I've been listening to you for several months now at the suggestion of my pastor, which is awesome. Probably 30 of your podcasts, some of your sermons. He then gives some specific positive feedback, which is very gracious. And if ever you're going to give negative, man, it's always great to lead with, no, I really do appreciate some things. I've loved this time listening to you, yet I'm thinking I have to stop. I've become increasingly concerned about what you're conveying to your target demographic, millennials, best I can tell. We don't have a target demographic, by the way. Now, I am definitely not your demographic, as I'm a 63-year-old white male in NorCal who has been an evangelical Christian for about 40 years. And then he adds this beautiful line, no, I didn't vote for Trump, Hillary, or Hillary either, for that matter. I do not expect your teaching to address my generation. In fact, one of the reasons I've been listening to you is to make sure I'm not just in my little own echo chamber. How great is that?
Yeah.
Wonderfully
self-aware.
Oh, well, and I want to be that kind of 63-year-old, right? I mean, I've learned as people get older, and I mean 50s, 60s, 70s, people either get more and more open and generous and kind, or they get more brittle and angry and bitter. And I mean, it's a world of difference between the two. And so I just want to affirm this guy for being the kind of person that recognizes there are such things as echo chambers, and to make sure he's not sitting in one. I love that. I love that and affirm that. So to me, I just already go, man, I'm interested in what he has to say. He said, that said, I have two main concerns about the meta message you deliver to your millennial listeners. So any use of the word meta, we're in. Right. Automatically. Andy is automatically, meta is such a hipster word. He's in.
Yeah.
In.
Are you sure you're not our target demographic?
Right. Seriously. Come on, 63. Number one. All right. So I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to respond to it. Number one, you relentlessly condemn the church. Evangelicals, American evangelicals, the American evangelical church, conservative Christians, ... If I were one of your millennial listeners, I would conclude that there is no good anywhere in the church other than maybe the one you're leading. I know that is not true, nor it is fair or factual. So if that's the impression we have given, then you're absolutely right. That is wrong. And we should not be doing that. If we've given the impression, either two impressions, one, there is no good anywhere in the church, or that we're the only church doing it right, that is arrogant, presumptuous, that is a slam on the bride of Jesus. Absolutely, totally agree. If that's the message we're giving, then we are wrong. No question about it. And while we talk about Vox, I hope we don't talk about it as something that is perfect, something that is better, something that is in any way superior. We're just trying something different, and we're learning and making mistakes along the way. That's all this is.
Yeah.
He said, you are very unbalanced in your presentation of topics in the sense of fairly presenting other views in the church. Yes, I agree with that. I'm not representing the conservative views well on the podcast because I'm not spending much time interacting with them.
Right. Plus, the conservative views are extremely loud in the media space in general.
Well, yes. For instance, now here's great specific negative feedback. For instance, in the December 9th podcast on exclusivity, you mentioned so-called conservative views for about 1 minute of a 68-minute podcast, and you used your typical dismissal. I get that, but honestly, Mike, I feel you are being disrespectful and demeaning to the church. Perhaps you have been hurt by the church, as many of us have, and the answer is yes. Yes, I have been. And I'm going to respond to all this just in a second. He's got one more paragraph. What?
I was just going to say after, and whatever, if I'm going to be the one that's on the critical angle of it, like if you've listened to 30 episodes of the podcast, I come off surprised that you wouldn't figure that out. To me, that's
been hurt.
Yeah. That you've been hurt by the church. So anyways.
Yep. So yes, I have. We'll get to that in a second. My question for you though is, where are all the people you're reaching going when they accept Christ? The answer of the church, of course. Help them understand the church, how varied it is. It often gets wrong, and what it often gets right, what it's worked through over 2,000 years. Help them understand that your church will be no better or different. It will be a group of sinful people trying their best to figure out how to be more like Jesus. Amen. Yeah, we never want to give that impression. In fact, we tell our people all the time, we're going to disappoint you.
Yeah.
Please don't hold us out as the non-disappoint you church. We're going to disappoint you. We just don't know how. So my feedback to you regarding constant condemnation of the church is, in the immortal words of Bob Newhart, showing my age, stop it. And then he sent a YouTube link to an old Bob Newhart episode. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for specific feedback. Mm-hmm. And like I've already said, if that's the message, see, we want the message to be about Jesus. We don't want to be a message about the church. We use the behavior of the church sometimes as a foil for how Jesus is beautiful and how his beauty has been obscured. And I felt justified doing that for the following reasons. All right. Now, again, I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm trying to say, no, I very well could be way too negative. And I've not gone back to listen to some of the earliest podcasts where evidently I was an angry young man. Hopefully I'm mellowing out my old age.
Kind of find out you have an alter ego on a forum somewhere, just completely raging.
Lord, don't even pull the Driscoll card right now. All right. So here's why I feel justified in criticizing the church. All right. Number one, the prophetic critique in the Old Testament was always of the people of God. It was relentless. God was relentless in dripping critique on his people through the prophets. There are obviously warnings. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying in any way, shape, or form ever that I'm in any way, shape, or form related to what God was doing there, and I'm somehow doing that for the church. No. I just know God's heart, often when it comes to criticism or judgment, is expressed towards his people first. You see this with Jesus. Jesus' harshest words were for the religious hypocrisy. He talks about hell only in those contexts. He goes after the hypocrisy of the religious elite. And when he comes across people that are broken, that are sinful, that have been marginalized and discounted, he talks to them differently. Now, obviously, there are some religious elite folks who he disciples and meets with and invites in. Others, though, they're pits of snakes and they're children of vipers and they're whitewashed tombs. I mean, the language is it's hyperbolic, and it's part of the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament Jesus carries forward. Even in the book of Revelation, when you have Jesus speaking words to churches, they're words of very specific positive and specific negative feedback, right, for them. So there is, I think, a deep well of permission to critique the church. Now, if that critique becomes condemning, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because what we don't want to say is that there's nothing good in the church, or that somehow we've given up on it. In fact, we did a 3-part series on why people are leaving the church, and the last part of that was why we're still in.
Yeah.
And here's the biggest thing I want you to know, sir. The reason we started a church was because we realized we could not just sit and critique it without trying to do something to help.
Yeah.
So in our mind, in my mind, the critique is directed at me because I've been a part of the evangelical movement for 20 years as a leader and as a public figure and as a teacher. And secondly, it's also aimed at the church that I love, that I'm never going to give up on, that I have committed my life to serving and leading and teaching, and it's a reflection of the deep passion we have that the church is non-negotiable. That we wouldn't just settle for doing a podcast, but we launched a church out of one. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be folks who are just known for condemning the church. So to the degree we have condemned it, I repent and I am sorry. I'm sorry to Jesus and I'm sorry to his followers. To the degree we've criticized it, I'm not sorry.
Right.
Because there is legitimate harm that has to be called out and dealt with. The story, so the harm done to me, the harm done that I've done to people, and then the very legitimate stories of harm that have done have to be talked about, discussed, so that they can be healed. We cannot just sit and pretend, yes, it's imperfect, and wipe away the stories of sexual abuse, the stories of religious abuse or spiritual abuse, the staggering numbers of megachurch pastors that are falling into sin and divorcing and drinking and whatever else. We have to address that stuff. And so if it's critical, I don't apologize for that. If it's condemning, you're absolutely right, and I repent. There is so much good in the church. You're absolutely right. There is nowhere else to go. This is what we're saved into. Yeah. We're saved into an imperfect community. And so our view about what Vox is it's another expression of the imperfect community that's called the church. End of story. Not better, not superior, different. And we'll make our own mistakes, but we're trying to address some of the big holes we see theologically and practically in church practice and theology that's currently out there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a legitimate expression. So, because it's always easier to criticize than to create. So I thought, first of all, what a well-spoken critique. And if that's the message that people are getting is there's nothing good in the church, then we're dead wrong. Absolutely dead wrong, and terribly sorry to have conveyed that message. Because Jesus is found, one of the many places Jesus is found is right in the middle of his church, right? Mm-hmm. That is his body.
Yeah.
So that was big point number one, big meta message point number one. Love it. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about, because I would imagine that we've got 2 or 3 kinds of listeners. We've got a crew of listeners that church it's dead to them. Either it's not interesting or they've been so hurt by it they're never going back.
Yeah.
We also have a crew of listeners who are suspicious. They're disenchanted. They're disenfranchised. They've been exiled. They've been marginalized. And they need to hear that their disenfranchisement is given voice. And they need to hear that there are still those of us out there who have not given up on the church despite its many flaws, but are trying to find new expressions and forms, wineskins in biblical language, for the beautiful wine of the gospel of Jesus. And so we feel it necessary to do 2 things at once: to talk about the beautiful Jesus and to give voice to some of the hurts that are legitimate and that people have experienced at the hands of religion and religious people. And then there's a third kind of listener, which is just, hey, I'm happy with church. It's great. It's glorious. Why are you so negative? And to kind of have a podcast that speaks to all 3 is very interesting for us. And the feedback we get is interesting for us. And so we're just, if we've over-aired on one side of that, we'll do better. The second critique he has is you seem to carefully avoid taking a stand on the side of truth. So this is a pretty serious critique. I have learned much from you about grace and could stand to learn a lot more from you about that. What a gracious way to say this. But you assiduously, good word, avoid taking any kind of stand with respect to what your listeners might consider to be tough truths, homosexual behavior being the one you've avoided big time. Podcast 58 is yet another example. Again, love the specificity of these.
Yeah.
Where I quote, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Come on, Mike. You cannot just push that aside like you did in the podcast. And you cannot avoid that Jesus did indeed speak more than once of what awaits those who do not embrace the kingdom of heaven. Absolutely. That's why we're doing a series on hell right now in the church. We're actually doing a series on hell. So I don't want to avoid stuff like that. I agree with you that Jesus is beautiful, but he did say some hard things that he knew we needed to hear. Absolutely. And he gives several examples. I'm wondering if you're conflating methods for evangelism. I'm with you totally in many ways on this. For example, you cannot frighten people into the kingdom with a need to avoid speaking truth. Grace without truth is just as destructive as the opposite. I saw an imploded church. Yes, the church has done evangelism wrong often and in many ways, but avoiding the truth is an overreaction to those mistakes. Okay, I'm done. Like you say in your podcast, this is so gracious. I know there is so much more to say, nuances to address. I probably screwed this up or worse, hurt you in some way. You did not hurt me. He adds a parenthesis, I don't always see clearly with that plank in my eye. So let me end with this. We do not know each other, so I probably have no basis to make the comments I have. That's false. Absolutely, you do have basis to make the comments you have. I therefore ask in advance for your forgiveness. Don't need to. You are a brother in Christ, putting yourself out there in his name. I admire, respect, love you greatly for that. I'm humbled by what you do. Holy cow. So first of all, that's just a great lesson on how to give feedback.
Yeah.
It's specific. It's bathed in kindness. He's not attacking my person. Oh my goodness. I can hear this and resonate with this and marinate on this. Mm-hmm. So this kind of feedback I do. I marinate on it. I go and I say, okay, God, is this true? Some thoughts on the avoiding truth, because I think this is a big one, and I don't have so I see why you say that for sure, and I also see the podcast space we're trying to inhabit different from a church space. So in a church space, when you're sermonizing and when you are talking predominantly to people who are come there knowing it's a church, mm-hmm. I feel freedom to have a certain kind of conversation. When you're in a podcast space and you have listeners from every imaginable background, there is a different kind of of space that I can't just assume everyone buys the Bible. I can't just assume you say, hey, you avoid speaking the truth about homosexuality. Well, for some of our listeners, as we've talked about, the truth about homosexuality is that their homosexuality is not addressed in the Bible.
Yeah.
For others, no, their homosexuality is addressed in the Bible, and they're invited to be celibate. For still others, nope, all homosexuality is wrong. Even orientation, forget it. So how do you speak truth, quote unquote, into that environment? Well, the biggest thing we've tried to do is to talk about how the conversation needs to be had. We've not gone through the truth passages. We're not advancing a particular view of sexuality yet. Now, we are going to talk about sexuality this year in some podcast forums, because I think there's a ton of cultural stuff to talk about. We will talk about kind of where we land on this stuff. But the conversation we've been having around LGBTQ is less about the rightness or wrongness of LGBTQ and much more about the rightness and wrongness about how they've been treated in the church community and how they should be treated while we're in the midst of this massive discernment about where we stand on these matters.
Right.
So I'm with you on... I've assiduously avoided. Yes, I have. I said 2 podcasts ago, I hold the traditional view. That was hurtful to some folks because the traditional view to them simply means they're in sin. There's no possibility of redemption. They should be rejected. They're not trusted. They're welcome, but they're not loved. We're trying to change them. I mean, they pack so much into that. And my learning was, okay, I can't use that shorthand because what I mean by the traditional view is something different than that. So I respect the fact that you feel like we're avoiding hard teachings. And I'm always open to that critique because that's the last thing we want to do. But I also feel like we're having this conversation at the community about hell. Well, we're going to spend probably 5 or 6 weeks on this topic. We're not going to run away. We're not going to avoid it. We want to talk about cost of following Jesus. There are just some things you talk about from inside the faith, and there are other things you talk about outside the faith, right? So yes, I have a view on the age of the earth, and I have a view on this and this and this, but I try to keep some of that murky in the podcast space because we're trying to engage, we're trying to model how engagement should look and conversation should happen. And so I'm open to the critique, but at the same time I go, but there's this church thing, and so I'd want you to listen to that to see if we're avoiding the hard stuff. Also, one of the series that I'm working on in the future is Embarrassed by the Bible. So I think that'll be a good podcast series I want to go to those passages that are either the most difficult teaching or the most embarrassing parts of the Bible and go, hey, let's look at these. Yeah. And just say, yep, here they are. Here's maybe ways we can understand them. Here's pieces of cultural background. So if a year from now you still feel this way, I will re-engage with this critique. I'm just not sure yet. Because you're onto something when you say, I'm talking about evangelism. We're talking about how cultural engagement should happen. And we're doing more of that and less than, hey, here's my view. See, there are loads of sermon podcasts where, the view is given. And there are loads of discussion podcasts where we just kind of marinate on something. We're trying to do something a little different than that, which is here's cultural engagement. And we're trying to model it. We're trying to work on a theology around it. We're trying to practice it. And so anyway, what are your thoughts, Andy Bear?
Okay, this is going to come out of, this is a left field thought here.
Oh, shocking.
I was thinking about this on the way home. And I love what you just said now because it kind of tied it in. It's interesting to talk about how the church treats people outside the church. The posture in the commission is to invite in, to share gospel, to share it, right? To help people understand what it means to play a part and what it means independently and also communally and corporately.
That's right.
I think when we look at the promise that's been given us, covenant relationship from God, we've talked about this in other podcasts, and I was thinking about this last night. It's like contractual relationship sounds like it defines your decision making based on right and wrong, versus covenant decision making becomes more about freedom and oppression or pleasure versus pain. Like you're analyzing, am I bringing joy? Am I bringing gospel to this person I'm in a relationship with, or am I taking from them, which is going to cause pain that's malicious and or maybe safely challenging? Like am I presenting challenges that are healthy, that are for the benefit of the one, or am I creating joy? So when I think about going out and trying to represent Jesus, to me it seems like there needs to be this deeper reflection of covenant love to neighbor in grace. So that means I'm not going to people with contractual mindset of right and wrong and trying to hold them to this morality that somehow is supposed to spark their interest to God.
Yep.
But rather to represent a promise that says, what does it look like for me to submit myself so that you find joy? And that represents this gospel that I'm so convicted by.
Andy, that's not out of left field. That's actually half decent.
Oh, good. Okay.
I am impressed because we've talked a lot about how do you engage with people outside the faith? Grace before truth. Kindness leads to repentance, the pre-acceptance of table fellowship. Now, see, and that is the knock. Well, you're not preaching hard truth. Who did Jesus preach hard truth to? He preached hard truth to covenant people. And that goes back to our first point.
Right.
I don't see Jesus walking around to the centurion, the leper, the women caught in adultery. Yes, go and sin no more. But after, Zacchaeus, come down. I must eat with you. I mean, there's all of this like grace before truth that did the work. And this, sir, is where I think we would disagree. Just announcing the truth and thinking that is all that's required to engage culture today is one of the biggest catastrophes the church has fallen into. To just sit and say, yep, here's my view on LGBTQ and shut that down. Nope, we want to create a mutually transformative community where I'm listening to the stories and the interpretations of Scripture from gay brothers and sisters, and they're factoring into whatever my view is.
Right. Putting truth first in this case seems incredibly authoritative, versus like us to listen, to your point, requires us to be submissive to that. Like, to me, that's servanthood, walking into that scenario.
Yeah, and it seems like, okay, who did he say hard truth to? Yep, Christians, great. But so much of the hard truth that you're referencing is it's not the hard truth of love of enemy, bless those who persecute you, serve the poor, right? The hard truth you're pointing to is different kinds of hard truth. And so it's moral and sexual. And I'm with you. Our world is unbelievably sexually confused, and the gospel needs to be spoken into. But how does the gospel speak to sexual issues? Does it speak by, here's the truth, without any context, without any covenant, without any incarnation? Or does it speak out of kindness, concern, and grace first? So I think that's, and I'm sure you're sitting there thinking I'm misunderstood, or I'm blind, or I've missed your point on this. And so please, more feedback needed. But I think I see your number 2 as a extension of your number 1. And that's where I go, okay, I don't want to be the kind of person that doesn't go to the hard stuff. I've written tons about sexuality. I've spoken tons. We've gone through Song of Solomon 3 or 4 times. I mean, I've talked about this like crazy. But in this issue, because we want to model engagement, I have not been going over my interpretation of Leviticus and my interpretation of Romans 1. I have those opinions, but we're trying to create a culture where people can come to the table and not be shut down immediately by just smacking people with, well, the truth is you're in sin, and unless you agree with me, all conversation's over. Right.
And first and foremost, because we simply couldn't do that to every person that's walking around in sin, because that would mean every single one of us.
Boom. So yes, I totally respect what you're saying, and I totally respect getting to the point where you're like, hey, you guys are kind of a one-trick pony. I got what you're saying. Hallelujah. I need to move on to John MacArthur or whatever. Totally get that. Totally respect that. But I really thought you had given such thoughtful, specific, positive and negative feedback that I wanted to engage with it, because I also wanted to spend a little time talking about what we're trying to do here. Why we do this. This for us is an expression of the kind of cultural engagement we think is needed now, whereas the old forms of cultural engagement and the old assumptions that governed them are no longer valid. So in the podcast format is good and bad. It's good in the sense that it's more conversational than a sermon. It's bad in the sense that it's still an echo chamber, right? I'm sitting with Andy at the Vox World headquarters. He's got weird socks on today, some 3/4 sleeve shirt, Mighty Ducks hat on. And so he and I are just looking at each other, talking into a microphone. The reason lately we've been responding so much to emails and feedback is because we don't want it to just be an echo chamber. We want it to be a conversation,
right,
even if it's a week or two behind.
Yeah.
So we're so grateful for your topic ideas. We're so grateful for your questions. We're so grateful for your specific feedback. Sir, I thank you for listening. I thank you. I'm so proud of you. I want to be that kind of 63-year-old in 30 years when I get there. Andy's close, and so we're excited about that. So love to hear your thoughts on all this stuff. I would love to hear the feedback of some of you. Do you feel like we're too critical of the church and we're not talking about hard things? Love your thoughts on whether you agree or disagree. And always love topic ideas and questions, particularly things we haven't talked about yet. So, my brothers and sisters, as always, we are phenomenally grateful for the time you give and that you open up your life to us. And so, because of that, we will yet again embrace the blessing from Tiny Tim. God bless us, everyone. Right? Did I say it right this time?
Yeah, you did.
God bless us, everyone. Feliz Navidad. And how do you say Merry Christmas in Norwegian?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, we don't know. If you're listening in Norway, would you tell us? Many blessings to you, my brothers and sisters. Until next time.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast. And now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/VoxPodcast.